Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is time for Charting with Dan after the long Memorial Day weekend. I'm Dan Murrell. Joining me yet again to complete this solo Star Wars story is Mr. Lon Harris.
It's like part 2 of this exciting adventure.
It is. Lon,
I hope you don't have franchise fatigue.
I hope you don't have franchise fatigue for charting or SJ News in general.
Please.
Lon, we sat here 8 days ago.
We did.
We predicted some things for Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Almost all of them were wrong. Let's just look at the top 5.
This was a tough call.
This was a very tough call. This is the top 5 movies these are the 4-day totals. This is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday here in the U.S. As expected, Solo: Star Wars Story, the #1 movie. However, much lower than many had expected, just cracking $100 million. At one point, Lon, a month ago, this was considered to be a sure bet to become the highest opening movie ever on Memorial Day.
Sure.
Didn't even crack the top 5
Yikes.
Memorial Day openings. We will talk a lot more about those expectations, where they came from, what possibly could have happened with Solo later on in the show. But for now, let's put it in context with the rest of the Star Wars franchise. First of all, let's look at the domestic opening weekends for Star Wars and why these numbers aren't quite the full context. So this is domestic opening weekends. Now, these are the 3-day weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. As you can see, Solo sneaks in at 5th place, $84 million Friday through Sunday, which, you know, if you look at what a Star Wars Story, The Last Jedi, certainly a low mark for the Disney era.
Sure.
In Star Wars.
About half of what Rogue One pulled in.
Half of what Rogue One pulled in, below Revenge of the Sith, which came out 13 years ago.
Yeah.
These are unadjusted numbers.
Right,
I have not adjusted these numbers for inflation. But when looking at the numbers for Star Wars, a lot of them did not open on Fridays.
Right.
Phantom Menace opened on a Wednesday. Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith opened on Thursday. So when you're looking at opening weekend, which we all count at the industry standard is Friday through Sunday.
Right.
For some of these movies, they had a day or 2 days to play before you even look at the opening weekend numbers. So I wanted to look at domestically, what do Star Wars movies traditionally look like after 4 days opening? So for Solo, this would be Friday through Monday. For a movie like Attack of the Clones, this would be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Right.
This would kind of account more for what does this actually look like after the same amount of time in the marketplace.
And it captures that, like, people were going the night before. I mean, Star Wars movies tend to create that excitement on opening day, opening night.
They do. So this is when you look at how Star Wars movies have performed through 4 days domestically. Again, the Disney movies lead the way, but if you look at Revenge of the Sith and Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, both outperform Solo. Again, unadjusted for inflation. Those 5 movies all outperform Solo through 4 days.
And by a significant amount, by over $30 million.
By a pretty significant amount. And again, if you adjust for inflation, that goes up substantially. If you adjust for inflation, Solo trails every Disney film and every prequel after 4 days of release. If you're looking at adjusted dollars, which means that for the modern era of Star Wars films domestically, and we'll talk about globally in a minute. For the modern era in Star Wars films, Solo is off to the slowest start of any of the movies.
You got to take it back to Jedi.
You got to take it back to Jedi, and that's when movies were released in about 1/4 of the amount of theaters on opening weekend. When opening weekend wasn't that big of a deal, it was about
longevity.
3 months, 2 months of playing. So, Lon, before we look at the global openings, and we have a lot of things to digest with what might have happened with Solo, but as you saw these numbers come in, was it surprising? Was it not surprising?
It was a little surprising for me. I mean, we had talked last week about, like expectations, and I had said I thought this would come in a little below Rogue One. I had already seen it. But this kind of a drop-off is surprising, and I think that's what created this whole question over the weekend of, like, people just trying to explain it. Like, this is such an anomaly. It feels so much lower than we expected. The conventional explanations just don't seem satisfying in this case.
Right.
Like, this isn't a few people chose to stay home or the marketing just didn't connect with a certain chunk of the audience. This is a substantial group of people who would normally go see a Star Wars movie opening weekend did not go this week.
Did not go. And like I said, we're going to talk about, and I think that the reasons are varied and they are many. And I think people are trying to pick one, and I don't think that it's one.
Yeah.
Which is kind of leads to the theory that I'm going to be talking about here in a minute. But it's you can't argue with the fact that it's not a 20% drop off. It's not a a thing of just like, well, it opened $20 million lower than the last one. I wonder. No, this is in the case of 5 months. we don't even have that kind of theoretical for like, well, if it wasn't an episode, we don't have that kind of judgment because we had Rogue One.
We've already seen how
almost double in its opening weekend what Solo did.
And fascinatingly for Rogue One, if you were just looking at these two projects on paper, like without them being movies, and it was like, this one is about an incident that's well known but does not have, at least in the marketing, any of the recognizable faces or characters, versus this is a prequel about maybe the most iconic movie character of all time.
One of them, definitely.
Like,
I mean,
a top 5
definitely
most
a top
iconic
5
movie character.
I mean, people love that character, and now the question is, do they just love Harrison Ford? Is Harrison Ford what people love? Do they love the character of Han Solo without Harrison Ford? I'm sure Disney executives are asking themselves that question.
Oh yeah, well that's going to be another fascinating thing, is beyond the whole scope of this show is what lessons is Disney going to draw from this?
What lessons can they draw? We'll see. Let's look, Lon, I mentioned the global opening. A lot of times the movie will open soft here and we'll say like, well, the good news is that it did well overseas.
Sure.
Actually, the news is a little bit worse overseas for Solo. Let's take a look at the global openings. We looked at this last week, the top 5 Star Wars franchise global opening weekends. I remember, Lon, we both thought it was going to be like, it'll probably be about in the 3rd place spot there.
I think 3, I had guessed maybe between 3 and 4 that it would pop up there.
It actually did not make the top 5. When the final numbers came in, it performed just under Attack of the Clones, the difference being that Attack of the Clones has 16 years of inflation in between it and Solo, a Star Wars story. Now, this is key because 50 to 55% of the business for the Disney Star Wars films have come from overseas. So if business doesn't pick up, not only could Solo not be a huge success, there have been reports that it was massively expensive, maybe more expensive than The Force Awakens and some other similar movies, because they essentially reshot
all the reshoots,
depending on reports, 60 to 70% of the movie. This could be the first legitimate live-action Star Wars flop.
Or at least a movie that won't recoup its earnings in theaters.
Exactly. It's going to sell toys and Lego sets and stuff. It's not like Disney's not going to make money off of it.
Exactly.
But as far as box office receipts, when Last Jedi came out, we did a whole show where I kind of broke down the numbers, and the question was The Last Jedi underperforming? And up to that point, and I think even if you look out, my result was it's not underperforming, but it's certainly not showing any kind of growth beyond a completely average performance for a sequel. And my time there was, I think what you might see bearing out more is what happens with Solo as far as what people think about Star Wars. Now, this is coming out just after Last Jedi, so the question is, I don't think there is a question anymore. The concept of Star Wars as a completely untouchable juggernaut, it was certainly hurt by the fact that Jumanji and Greatest Showman and so many other films were competitive with it in the holiday space that was supposed to just bulldoze. The image of Star Wars as an untouchable, unkillable global juggernaut is gone at this point.
Well, I mean, I think I can't argue with that. And I think the other element of that, too, that I would add in is we've now seen on a global scale, certainly if you talk about America, Star Wars remains one of the central, most popular franchises. But internationally, we've seen a bunch of other franchises sort of compete at that level or surpass it. Fast and the Furious, Transformers. I think we've now sort of entered an era where Star Wars is one of many popular film franchises, rather than being what you and I have spent most of our lives living in,
the unquestioned king.
Star Wars is the number one, and then everybody else is trailing in their wake.
So much more Star Wars to talk about. But before we get there, let's look at the rest of the top 5, just to breeze through a couple other notable things.
We got to talk book club.
Yeah, actually, we are going to talk book club. But first, let's talk Deadpool 2. If you look at the 3-day, Friday through Sunday, it dropped about 66%. That's a bigger drop than the original Deadpool had in its second weekend. However, if you add in Monday, it's about an identical percentage drop. It's currently running about $20 million behind the gross of the original Deadpool movie. I know a lot of people had said that, we'll look at the Friday gross, because the Friday gross was something like a 77% drop, which, yes, that's a lot. However, you have to keep in mind that was adding in Thursday night previews, which you're not going to have on the second. A lot of people will point at the second Friday and be like, look at this massive drop Friday to Friday. Like, yes, but
Right.
when you have previews that get added into that, you are going to see a big drop. So a pretty standard drop between 50% and 65% for a superhero movie in its second weekend.
But they're also the original Deadpool wasn't just the kickoff of this franchise. It was a cultural moment. It was a very significant shift in sort of audience expectations. It got a lot of hype. It's a lot to ask for every movie to carry through with that. Like we've now met Deadpool.
Right.
I think we sort of get it. So yeah, you're going to get a little bit of diminishing returns on future sequels.
And I mean, it's not just holding its own versus Star Wars at this point. I mean, we'll see how Solo legs out, but we could be looking at a universe where a Deadpool movie and a Star Wars movie are competing for box office performance, which is
next week. Yeah. Friday.
What a difference 2 or 3 years makes.
Unless Action Point pulls it out. We'll see.
Yeah, you never know. Action Point could do well. I'm going to go see it. Another benefactor of Solo's maybe softer than anticipated performance appears to be Infinity War. It held well again, 40% drop off for the 3-day, 23% for the 4-day. It is now $70 million away from Black Panther's domestic gross, although Black Panther has been gaining on it. It opened about I think $40 to $50 million ahead of Black Panther. That's now shrunk down to less than $20 million just because Black Panther racked up such great grosses as it went on week 2, week 3,
it's hard
week 4.
to imagine. I mean, a year ago, if somebody was like, Black Panther very competitive with Infinity War, would not have seemed likely.
You know, Infinity War to this date has earned more than Black Panther had earned to the date, but Black Panther is closing that gap slowly. So I still think it's going to be very competitive to see which one of these two ends up grossing more domestically. Overseas, Infinity War is now less than $90 million from breaking $2 billion worldwide, which I said this weekend. Ironically for Disney, the one thing that might get Infinity War over the $2 billion mark is a softer than anticipated performance for Solo because people are still going to see Infinity War.
True.
So it's really kind of taking from one hand and just giving it to, taking it from out of one Disney
division,
pocket and putting it into another Disney pocket.
MCU to Lucasfilm.
And exactly. It's
different.
They serve
entities.
the same corporate, I don't know.
Well, but Disney, I mean, it is interesting to look at, Disney. They knew Infinity War and Black Panther. Obviously, Black Panther was bigger than anticipated, but they're counting on Star Wars too. It is a tentpole for them. They're taking risks on stuff like Mary Poppins and Nutcracker
and keep in mind
Wrinkle
that they
in Time.
just had a miss with A Wrinkle in Time.
Right.
They just did an experimental film that did not perform well.
Those are the movies that are supposed to be more of like let's see, it's a literary adaptation. Ava DuVernay's hot. We'll take a chance on it.
Yeah.
Solo's supposed to be the okay, but we know that Solo's going to perform.
Right. So now
it's all
up in the air, yeah. And Lon, we talked about Book Club last week about how movies like Book Club generally tend to have pretty strong legs.
Yeah.
It did. It held well. It dropped less than 25% if you look at the 3-day weekend. Almost even with its opening weekend over the 4-day weekend. So Book Club holding strong. Life of the Party also and Breaking In were two Mother's Day movies that have held fairly well. They're both in the mid $30 million range. Book Club is holding well. Again,
counter-programming.
And just the idea of, I think that people are kind of trained into this thing of like the market works for every movie the same where everybody rushes out on the opening weekend. And that's not true of all genres. Comedies have longer legs. Older skewing films tend to have longer legs like Book Club in the sense that people go in week 2, week 3. I'm going to take mom next week to see Book Club.
Sure. It's just that it's not like a release date. Oh, I can't wait to Book Club opening night. You'll get to it.
Yeah, I saw it last weekend. I liked it. It's cute.
It looks fun. They're all great. Those 4 are all great.
Great actors. I don't know. I liked it. I thought it was a cute movie.
I like how even our old skewing rom-coms are sort of like meta, always have this cultural commentary, they've got to read 50 Shades of Grey in the old lady book club.
Yeah. I was glad that 50 Shades of Grey wasn't a huge, massive hinge point of the movie because that might have really soured me on it.
That would
just the association.
Yeah, a whole movie would be much.
Looking at the top per screen average, it was won by a space movie, but not the one I think most people would have thought because for the second week, the per screen contest was won by a 50-year-old movie by Stanley Kubrick. 2001: A Space Odyssey, the 70mm re-release, holds its own in its second week and takes the per-screen average again on just 4 screens. A lot of people tweeted and left comments after the show saying they were very frustrated that it was only playing on 4 screens.
Right.
I haven't found specifics, but I did read that they are going to expand this. They're going to roll it out to more places that are equipped to run 70mm, which is not a lot. But if you haven't seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, on 70 millimeter, and you want to. Unfortunately, you're probably going to have to be in a larger market or near a larger
Los
market.
Angeles.
Yeah, exactly. Fly out to LA, we'll go see it.
Yeah.
But keep an eye out if you have somewhere a house that can do that. In the next weeks to come, look out, because it really is worth it.
You would hope sometimes this happens where these revivals come out and they do well and people get excited. And I keep hoping that that's going to start a trend and we'll get a few of them a year.
Yeah.
Classic movies, either remastered or not, but brought back. And it seems like it's so rare still.
I saw Lawrence of Arabia in 70 millimeter this weekend at the Arrow Theater here over in Santa Monica, and it was amazing. It looked incredible, and it was. I mean, it was a packed house, and that movie was. I hate so much when people say that classic movies are boring and old, because that movie was as alive and vibrant.
It's really funny.
It got laugh. Yeah, it got laughs. It got gasps. It got applause.
So good.
Great movies are great movies. Doesn't matter when they're made. And Lawrence of Arabia is one of the greats that I'd never seen. Really, I didn't really remember much about it because I saw it when I was a kid. So to see it like that, I agree. I wish that there was more market behind these things, because so many of these movies deserve to be seen.
The first time I saw Hitchcock's Vertigo was one of those too. They re-released a remastered print on screens in big markets, and it looked like those movies look amazing on the big screen. You lose so much when you go down to TV.
You really do. Well, I don't know. In our perfect world, which will never exist.
Everybody see 2001 in Lawrence of Arabia.
Go see. Yeah, exactly. So, Lon.
Yes.
Let's get to the matter at hand.
Let's dig in.
Solo.
Right.
So many theories about what happened.
I fought many of them out on Twitter.
Everybody
over the
was
weekend,
tweeting theories and talking about things. I saw 5 or 6 or 7 different theories. There might have been initials and names attached to them and hashtags and all kinds of. I don't even want to go into it.
What a thing.
But everyone's talking about what is it? Why? And I would like to posit a theory that it wasn't just one thing that led to Solo's performance, that it was a combination of several things.
Sure.
Some of which Disney controlled, some of which Disney didn't control. So I want to go through some of them. If you agree, if you're watching at home and you agree with it, great. If not, that's fine, whatever. But I really do think, when I looked at the big picture, when I looked at the numbers, when I looked at where the money was and where it wasn't, that this was kind of a perfect storm of circumstances that I think contributed to this movie not performing as people thought it should.
It's such a drop. It's such a shift from where we thought Star Wars movies would be, that it almost seems like it couldn't just be one thing.
Right.
It would be obvious if one thing had gone wrong and ruined this movie at the box office. It seems more like a lot of little things contributed.
Well, let's start with the one thing that everyone tweeted me and said was the obvious thing that was what went wrong and contributed to this movie not doing well at the box office, and that is a little movie called The Last Jedi. Yes, so many people have cited The Last Jedi as the only reason that Star Wars failed. It was a divisive film. It was a movie that angered a lot of longtime fans of Star Wars. However, it was a movie that energized a lot of fans of Star Wars. It was a movie that some people that weren't fans of Star Wars connected to. Nevertheless, it was a movie that drew some very strong reactions. A lot of people saying that they swore off Star Wars after The Last Jedi. And listen, I'm not going to say that that's not true. I'm sure that the performance of Solo was affected to an extent by people that saw The Last Jedi, didn't like it for whatever reason. Some of them are very legitimate reasons. Some of them are dumbass reasons that I'm not going to talk about here. But there are a lot of people that just didn't like The Last Jedi and didn't go see Solo. Yeah, I think that's 100% true.
I do. And I mean, I think, look, some of that definitely happened. I think the danger is when people look at the box office with their own preconceived agendas or notions or whatever.
Right.
And then they try to I'm going to find evidence for what I think in the box office, because there's just too many variables.
Right.
It's like it's hard to say this movie didn't do what I wanted and other people agreed with me and so they didn't go out to see this one. But having said that, I'm sure there is an element of it. There were so many people that felt so passionately about this that have been arguing about Last Jedi for months online that obviously that's going to fuel your decision about what movie to go see this weekend.
I'm not going to sit here and deny that there were some people that were so angry by The Last Jedi that they didn't go to Solo. So yes, I'm sure that was
I heard from some of them on the internet.
I heard from a lot of them. I'm sure that was one contributing factor. But another thing that with The Last Jedi that doesn't even affect necessarily the reaction to that film was just from a common sense marketing standpoint. With The Last Jedi coming out in December, Solo basically had a marketing window of 4 months because Disney's machine was behind The Last Jedi until it came out. And then, if you'll remember, we didn't see the first teaser trailer for Solo until the Super Bowl in February, which was 3.5 months, just under 4 months before
there was
it opened.
rampant speculation that it was going to be pushed back because we hadn't seen marketing for it. There was that troubled production. People thought, maybe this isn't ready yet.
So I think that The Last Jedi, number one, was a divisive movie. Number two, shortened the marketing window for Solo. And keep in mind that while they were marketing Solo, we had Black Panther, we had Infinity War, we had Ready Player One, we had Deadpool 2 that were also competing for attention and buzz and marketing, were coming out in news. That certainly didn't help. And also just the general thing that there are probably some people that are tired of Star Wars, tired of seeing Star Wars, tired of talking about Star Wars. Prior to being bought by Disney, Star Wars had put out 6 live-action films over the span of 28 years.
Yeah.
You had 3 and 6 years for the original trilogy. You had a gap of 16 years. You had 3 and 6 years for the prequels. In the Disney era, this is now 4 films in less than 2.5 years.
Yeah, I mean, there was a scarcity that made Star Wars very special that there just is not anymore. And there's never going to be, again, there's TV shows, there's video games. It's just ever present now. It's part of the deal with having Disney own it.
So related to The Last Jedi, I do think that there was some contribution to the fact of divisive movie that people didn't want, a shortened marketing span because of it, and some general fatigue on the franchise. I think that's one overall factor. However, there's more. Number 2, the movie itself. If you look at the numbers on it, audiences generally liked the film. It got a cinema score of an A-. However, the other Star Wars films, including The Last Jedi, Rogue One, Force Awakens, all got an A. A- is the cinema score that all the prequels got. Prequels generally were a little more divisive, to say the least.
Just a touch.
So you have a cinema score matching the prequels. That means that audiences liked Solo, but didn't perhaps like it quite as much as the other Disney films. Reviews were lukewarm. 6.4 average rating on Rotten Tomatoes, 62 on Metacritic. The press leading up to it, obviously, not good. The Lord Miller switch, Ron Howard, a lot of questions with that. I think part of the reason, again, why this movie didn't do well, it just wasn't as well received. It wasn't as well received as the other Disney Star Wars movies, combined with The Last Jedi factor. I think that you didn't have as much buzz on the street, just like, you have to go see it. You have to go see it. There's a lot of people saying, like, I'm either going to wait 3 months till it comes out.
There was a lot of like, well, this will be on Netflix at some point. Yeah. I feel like my pet theory sort of links up to this, which is that, and I actually think I had some problems with the movie. Alden Ehrenreich was not one of my problems. I actually thought he did a pretty good job. But I don't feel like there were a lot of moments either in the movie, and there were no moments in the trailer that were just like, this guy is embodying Han Solo.
You have to go see this now.
If you go see this movie, you will see this guy be Han Solo in a believable way. I think if you had communicated that in a trailer, a shot, a moment where we really felt like he's given me a very strong Harrison Ford Han Solo vibe, I think a lot more people would have been like, all right, I have to go see what they're doing with this. And I think that moment was not in the trailer. The trailer was like, look at this huge cast, and look at Emilia Clarke, and Woody Harrelson, and Donald Glover as Lando, and droids, and it wasn't like you're going to get a new guy playing Han Solo.
So these are 2 factors within the universe itself. Last Jedi, the follow-up from that. Solo, the movie itself, the bad press. Here's another one that I don't see a lot of people talking about, and it's weird to be talking about it on this show because we very rarely talk about this subject on Screen Junkies.
Despite my obvious expertise.
Sports. This was a huge sports weekend, not just in the United States, but even more so. We talked about the global numbers, even more so globally. In the U.S., there was a decisive NBA Finals game every night of this past weekend. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. 2 Game 6s Friday and Saturday, 2 Game 7s Sunday and Monday.
And like LeBron is playing. These are
the biggest
huge
star in the NBA.
If you're an NBA fan, you really wanted to see those games.
And Steph Curry. You've got the Golden State Warriors. Again, like probably the 2 biggest stars in the NBA, both playing decisive games every single night of this weekend. Those games all drew 10+ million viewers each. Game 7s are a huge ratings draw.
This is stuff you can anecdotally just see on the internet, on social media. Like, that's what was dominating the conversation. Like, it wasn't people were talking about Solo. When Last Jedi opened, every conversation in my feed was like, I can't believe it about Snoke. And this weekend it was like, is LeBron the GOAT, or is Michael Jordan still the GOAT?
And that pales to what happened. You know how in the U.S. they say never release a movie on Super Bowl Sunday?
Right.
Imagine Super Bowl Sunday times 10. That's what happened internationally this weekend, which is that the Champions League final was also this weekend. That is the biggest sporting event of the year. I don't care what the NFL says. It's BS. The Super Bowl is not the biggest sporting event of the year. No. Hundreds of millions of people watch this Champions League final every single year. Liverpool versus Real Madrid was Saturday night. that is not just a small part of your audience. That is a massive chunk of your audience that was probably spending at least one night this weekend away
Just
from the theater.
watching
There's
TV,
no
yeah.
doubt that there were people in the UK, in Spain, and around the world that were not going to Solo because they were getting ready for the game, they were watching the game, they were nursing hangovers after the game,
that
as I
whole
certainly
day,
would be.
You take that day out of the equation,
Right.
all across Central America, South America,
Yeah.
Europe, everywhere that is really passionate about soccer, they're going to watch that game.
So when you look at the soft global numbers, part of what I'm going to be looking at in the weeks going ahead is, were the people that were watching the Champions League final, did they go see Solo this next weekend or this week? Or are they just, again, lost viewers that are just
Right.
going to wait till the next go-round?
That's true. They will have a weekend to sort of catch up.
I'm not saying this is a reason, but I'm saying, again, in combination with The Last Jedi, with Solo, and the biggest sports weekend internationally, plus a huge sports weekend here in the U.S., again, I think that you've got lower numbers. The fourth thing that I saw a lot of people talk about, but that has a little more nuance, competition.
Yeah.
A lot of people saying, well, Disney was stupid. Disney was stupid to release this movie to compete against Avengers Infinity War and Deadpool 2. However, I want to keep a couple things in mind. Number one, Solo's release date was announced in February of 2017, just over a year ago. Disney had locked in the Avengers date back in 2014. Back in 2014, people had already kind of done the calculus and said, May, that's the big movie. Okay, that's going to be Avengers 3. I mean, that date was locked and loaded. There was no moving that date.
No,
you know
we've
how
been
Disney
building up
is.
for it for years.
And especially Marvel. They lock those dates in
Yeah.
years ahead, and that is the Marvel date. That's the Avengers date. That's you don't move that, but they did. That's the other thing. Disney did when they said,
They bumped
how
it up
could
by a
Solo have how could Disney have been so dumb as to think that Solo could compete with the Avengers? Obviously Disney had that same thought because they took the unmovable date and they themselves moved it up a week earlier to give Solo more space. And I think what they didn't anticipate was that Deadpool 2 then would come out and move their date to a week before Solo. Because when Disney dated Solo, they didn't put it there knowing that they were going to be competing with Deadpool 2.
Right.
Deadpool 2 moved there after they said they put Solo there.
And what are they going to? I mean, you also have to just say these schedules are so locked in at a certain point that you can't. Where are you going to move it? There's
Right.
nowhere else to move it.
That's a great question, Lon, because that's the other thing people say.
Right.
Why didn't Disney then move their date to December? And I have two words for you as to why they couldn't do that. Mary Poppins.
She's flying in on that umbrella.
is
She's going
flying
to
in.
land. It's just going to happen.
2 years ago, May 2016, Disney announced that Mary Poppins is already coming out locked and loaded for this holiday season. So if you're Disney, you have Solo already announced for May. You've already moved Avengers up a week and Deadpool moves. Okay, what are you going to do? Where are you going to move it? You can't move it to June. That's for Incredibles 2 as you're competing. You can't move it to July. You have Ant-Man and the Wasp. August, you got Christopher Robin in theaters there. November, you got Wreck-It Ralph 2. December, you got Mary Poppins. Now,
That's
the
right.
one thing that people could be asking, I think it's a legitimate question, is could Disney have moved Solo to August and let it compete in that August-September part of the summer where there's not a whole lot of
Usually
competition?
the doldrums of summer, the Hitman's Bodyguard weekend of summer.
But I think that's a legitimate question, and I'm sure that there's going to be people in the back office today saying, maybe we should have done that.
Yeah.
Maybe, but again, Deadpool moves. You're not anticipating that. You already have a project that's perceived to be in trouble. If you move it, the press gets even worse.
Right.
I think that a lot of people are really putting a heap of blame on Disney for putting it in such heavy competition when it was competition that they, one, proactively tried to remove as far away as possible by pushing Infinity War up a week, and two, weren't aware we're even going to be there until early this year.
Also, think about the press. If Disney had come out and announced in February or March, we're going to move Solo to August, everyone would have been like, oh, well, it's terrible.
Right.
It must be garbage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, might it have been smarter to move it to August? Maybe, but I also can see why they wouldn't have done that, and they're just lack of options.
Yeah, August
they
is
staked
getting
out
tighter
all those
too.
dates.
August is even getting more competitive now. We went. There used to be, like, when I was first getting into movies, there was really an idea of like movies had a calendar. There was like, okay, spring, the few weekends around spring break, huge movies come out. Then it's going to get real boring until summer. Then huge movies come out. Then you got a few weeks off where it's going to be really low. Then all the Oscar movies come out. Now we've just gone to like every weekend something big is coming out.
Right.
There's no more doldrums.
No. So, Last Jedi and the fallout from that.
Yeah.
The fact that it's not as well received a movie in general. The fact that you have the biggest sports weekend in the world and a huge sport weekend in the United States. The fact that you have competition that they tried to avoid but couldn't avoid, and one that jumped up ahead of them that they didn't know was going to jump ahead of them. And finally, the whole question of expectations. That's what we're talking about. Why didn't Solo live up to expectations? It came in under expectations. I want to take a look at, like, where did those expectations come from?
Right.
Largely where those expectations come from is from what the industry calls tracking. I've referred to it on the show before. We talk about it.
Sure.
SJ News tracking says this, tracking says that. What is tracking? Tracking is, sometimes the studio does it, but most people don't trust it because the studio is obviously not going to release bad tracking about the movie. And then generally tracking is research done by a third party, a company that looks at various different factors, and they will send a report to the studio saying, based on what we've researched, we think your movie is going to perform like this.
Yeah, it's a lot of like market research.
Yes.
The kind of thing, like sometimes you'll be at the mall or somewhere in public, and people will be like, "Hey, come watch this movie trailer and tell us what you think." Or they're doing focus group, like it's that kind of research, all being compiled together into like a report.
Yeah, based on what we think, here's how we think your movie's going to do. Now, that used to be internal data. That used to be the stuff that would go to Bob Iger, whoever, and he'd look at it and he'd go, and he'd send it to the spreadsheet guys, and they do their things. But about 10 years or so ago, as the entertainment media machine grew even bigger and the internet became an even bigger force, people started leaking this tracking stuff to the media.
Right.
So then you get news stories that are written around tracking, which again is not based on anything other than just guesses.
And these are the stories you see like a few weeks before a movie comes out or a week before a movie comes out.
Let's take a look.
Oh, there you go.
This
Great.
is a story.
Great.
This is
Well
a
done.
story, and I'm not knocking, Forbes or Scott or any of these people, but this is the kind of story that you get from tracking.
Right.
This was the one that set the expectation for Solo. This came out weeks before the movie. Someone did tracking on Solo, and someone probably from Disney contacted someone in the media and said,
Right.
Solo's on track to break the record for the Memorial Day weekend. So now you have third-party data that's done based off of their best guess, but nothing else. You then release that data to the media. The media then write the stories, and all of a sudden the narrative behind your movie becomes, this movie's on track to have the best Memorial Day weekend opening ever. Again, this is based off of nothing but, and this is before anyone has seen the movie.
Yeah, it's like when you read articles and it's like maybe eating 3 bars of dark chocolate is good for you. Like there are real medical, scientific health studies that are done, but then there are also like studies paid for by Hershey that are not very trustworthy, and you don't know what that study was based on the news article. And tracking's very similar. Like you don't really know what methodology was being used to determine these numbers,
and it's notoriously unreliable.
Yeah.
Tracking is absolutely completely unable to guess how many people will come out if a movie is really well received. It completely underestimated Black Panther. It completely underestimated Infinity War. It completely underestimated it. The difference being that it looks great when you put a story in the media saying that your movie's tracking to open to X amount of money and it goes above it. And it looks terrible when you put a story in the media saying it's going to track to this amount of money. And if you saw it, there were stories that were in the media last week, the week before, but even a week ago, they were still saying it's going to make 130 million. It's going to make 140 million. This is based on nothing. This is based on guesswork. So the expectation game largely is set by data that's completely useless, essentially, until maybe a few days before. Once the reviews come in and you can actually track word of mouth and see how many people are legitimately excited once the X factors come in, then tracking, and the tracking that came out after then was much more on point to where we were.
And this also should be confused. Like after movies open, very quickly they can estimate how much it should make over the course of the first weekend or over the course of the first week. That's much more scientific because then they're looking at the actual stats that are coming in. The other thing to say about tracking, you'll notice the movies you mentioned that the tracking got really wrong are movies that sort of break tradition in some way. Like It did really well despite being an R-rated horror movie. Black Panther, we don't usually think of the intro origin stories and an all African-American cast
as a box office
you don't usually and yet these movies are coming out. Deadpool, another R-rated movie, and yet so when you're changing the paradigm, shifting it, tracking's not good at keeping up with that.
It's like originality does well. It's shocking. The other thing, and it's not just tracking, you also get these stories based on data that is completely without context. You get stories like this, and I think we talked about this on SJUs. Advanced ticket sales breaking. Remember when Solo's advanced ticket sales were better than Black Panther's?
Breaking records.
Again, this is something that, I'm sure Fandango releases a press release saying that Solo is breaking, and they get great coverage. Solo gets great coverage. But again, what is that based on? Is that dollars? dollars? Is that number of tickets? Is that for the opening night? Is that for the opening weekend? It is completely context free, and it's just sort of released out into the world to create buzz and to create coverage. Again, if your movie does well, then that's a great story, because look at how many records. But what did that record breaking, and we don't know what record it broke, or by how much, or what it means. Then you look bad in comparison. So,
and you could see there was a little bit of an attempt to sort of move the goalpost. Like Ron Howard had that tweet over the weekend where he noted that this was still his biggest
it was his personal best
of all time. And it's like, yeah, but it's too late. Once you spent weeks telling people it's going to open to 150 million, now it's late to be like, well, but it did better than Cinderella Man.
So when I look back at Solo, and people ask why I think Solo didn't perform to expectations, some people say it flopped. Maybe. I don't know. We'll have to see again how it does in the marketplace after this. It's certainly not as much as people thought it would make. But when people ask what I think happened with Solo, I will tell them that I think it came after a very divisive movie that probably turned off a lot of fans, and that, some people had already seen a Star Wars movie. I think it was a movie that wasn't as good as some of the other movies. It was competing with a massive amount of outside media, including a big sports weekend. It was unable to move and facing competition that it hadn't anticipated, and it was a victim of anticipations and expectations that were not based on fact at all. It was based on external marketing data that's notoriously unreliable, that was then weaponized by the media because they have to make a story to set expectations that nobody knew if it could even meet. So the idea that it didn't live up to expectations is almost this self-created thing, because the expectations were created from thin air.
When the websites love it. I mean, if your job is to keep discussion going about movies, this has been a great discussion that's gone on for 3 days now. Like, if you can set up expectations and then the movies come out and they violate those expectations, well, now you've got a great discussion to have.
So here's what I'm going to do, because I think that in a way, yes, it gives you a headline, but it's not doing you much service in reporting the news, because the tracking numbers aren't very reliable, and nor is basing reporting on those tracking numbers reliable, other than saying like, well, these are probably BS. That's not a very good news story 6 weeks out to say like, these numbers probably won't hold up, but here they are. People kind of have to. But when I'm looking at box office, and I know that I've used tracking numbers on this show before, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
I'm going to try to judge each movie based on what amount of money it makes when it comes out, based on the week leading up to it, to see how the buzz is, to see what they're saying once reviews are actually out, once people have actually seen the movie and people are making their final decisions. Because Fandango and pre-sales, that's fine. That's not how most people are going to the movies. Most people aren't buying their tickets ahead of time. Most people are buying their tickets the weekend the movie comes out. So you can break all the pre-sales records you want. That doesn't mean anything.
Right. Well, I mean, it means something, but it means something very specific. It means like you've managed to really activate a community online and get them very excited, and that's significant, but it's not.
It means you're going to have a great Thursday night, which Solo did. Thursday, the news on Friday was Solo had the best Thursday night preview of any movie ever to come out on Memorial Day. That's your pre-sale. That's okay. Right. Then that's the story we're going to report. Those are your record pre-sale tickets.
People aren't buying pre-sale tickets for Sunday afternoon.
So I'm going to try to do a better job when I'm on this show looking at the box office and stuff, to look at the actual numbers, to look at the reality of it. I'm going to try to ignore these tracking things. And I would say to you, if you're watching and you like to follow this box office stuff as I do, this tracking and stuff is it's great sport. It's great to play fantasy movies, and I know that a lot of people play the fantasy movie league and stuff, but don't put too much stock in it. And don't base 100% of your assumptions about a movie based on these speculative numbers that come out 6 weeks before a movie comes out, because they're unreliable. And if you base everything around those and you set an expectation for a movie at a bar that nobody knows if it can clear, and I'm not saying Solo is a great movie. I didn't, I thought it was okay. There was a lot of things I didn't like about it. But at the same time, I think it was set up for failure in the sense that its numbers were based off of the numbers of other movies that weren't related to it, except that they had Star Wars on the name. And I think if the people doing box office analysis and research going into it had looked at actually some of the things, I don't think they would have set the bar as high. And again, when you set the expectation high and a movie doesn't meet it, it's like an echo chamber, because now the word has been
Now it's
sold
tarnished.
on Solo.
Now
it's tarnished. It's
the
a
movie
failure.
is a turkey, and people, whether they admit to it or not, and this is true of all of us. I'm not accusing some specific people. You want to be on the winning team. You want
Right.
to, you want to go see the. That's why they advertise movies as the #1 comedy in America, because people want to latch onto the thing that everyone else is enjoying.
Yeah.
So once the word gets out that it's Solo, not doing so great, then it's like,
Yeah.
no, I don't want to back a losing horse.
I'm
gonna go see the book club.
My insight on Solo and how I'm looking at it is based purely on the market reaction to previous Star Wars movies, which I think is probably the most reliable way to look at it,
Sure.
which says that it's performing vastly underperforming based on that criteria. That's the criteria I'm going to look at, and I encourage you take those tracking numbers with a grain of salt because there's so many other factors.
Sure.
So
Also, if you liked Solo, that's fine. You don't have to feel bad about it just because it didn't do well. It's still fine. It's still a movie.
that was the world's longest answer to one question. So let's wrap this up
Yeah.
real quick. Let's look at the summer movie report. As anticipated, Solo jumps in at number 3, Deadpool 2, and Avengers: Infinity War still number 1 and 1 and 2. And then you've got Overboard, Life of the
Overboard.
Party, Breaking In, Book Club. All these
Hanging in
will
there.
be gone in the next 6 weeks.
Bad Samaritan, I believe in you. Come
Bad
on, David
Samaritan,
Tennant.
come on! Oh, you need that burst. Not even
weekend.
on the box office charts this weekend. I had to look elsewhere to find that. So,
Yikes.
sorry, Bad Samaritan. Not sorry. It was a terrible movie. Looking at the domestic box office for the year, again, Solo jumps on the chart, not as high as a lot of people thought that it
Under
might.
Peter Rabbit. Wow.
Well, in one weekend, to be fair,
Sure,
that's
but
like
still.
4 months of Peter Rabbit in one weekend of
but
Solo.
wow, still.
Strangely, I think because it came out in April, the one movie that when I was putting these totals together that really made me look twice, and I think it's because it got caught up in the Infinity War stuff and everything. Look at A Quiet Place, $180 million for that movie.
Yeah.
Like that is an insane amount of money for that movie. That's crazy.
Because it's not. It's a really good movie. I
Yeah.
recently saw it, but it's just not the kind of thing that you think
It's
of
so tiny
as
and
like
small.
a marquee. Yeah, it's a small, intimate horror movie,
and it's handily outpacing Ready Player One domestically.
Wow,
So
it feels like one of those movies that you would like see it a year late, like Starry Eyes or something,
Yeah.
The Ritual, and you'd be like, hey, did you see that one on
that's
Netflix?
great,
It's pretty
yeah.
good, yeah.
So I talked about A Quiet Place when it opened, but another guy, kudos, hand clap for A Quiet
deserved
Place.
a really good, interesting, unique original movie.
Yeah, so good job, A Quiet Place. Let's look at the global box office. Solo, now people did think that it might jump on this one, but no, it's actually, again, depending on how it does, it might not jump on this chart, which would be insane.
It's no Detective Chinatown 2.
It's no Detective Chinatown 2, but Ready Player One is doing great globally. It jumps over Operation Red Sea to become the 3rd highest grossing movie of 2018 internationally. Deadpool 2 making some good progress. It's up nearly $500 million internationally. That's good news for Fox. And of course, Infinity War, Black Panther, the look on Infinity War will it become the 4th movie ever to break $2 billion at the box office?
Seems fairly likely at this point.
It seems a lot more likely than it did a few weeks ago. And of course, Lon, the most important number that we can bring you here on Charting with Dan, the countdown to the Meg. We are below 80 days.
Oh my
73
God.
days until the Meg, Lon.
It's only 73 days.
Are
This
you
is incredible.
excited?
I'm very excited for the Met. I mean, I'm a big fan of the cheesy shark B-movie genre.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is right up my alley.
Well, Lon, it's been an epic. I hope there's people that are still watching.
Yeah, wow.
If anything, it goes to show you that my personal philosophy is that there are very rarely easy answers to even the most simple question. I hope you have enjoyed looking at Solo and the box office and everything else. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Lon Harris. This has been a fun
wow.
Star Wars diversion
Yeah.
with you.
This
Ross
was fun.
Cornett will be back, I think, unless her
Probably.
mission is extended overseas.
Let's be honest. She'll probably be back.
We'll see.
Hopefully.
Well, I don't know. She's quite the super spy.
She's a world traveler.
And thank you, of course, as always, for watching. We'll be back next week with even more numbers. Let's see how Solo does in week 2. Did all those people that were watching sports go out and see it? Or is it destined to be the low man on the totem pole for the live-action Star Wars universe? We will find out next week. Thanks for watching.